Welcome. I'm Dan Weiss, the President and CEO of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and it is a great pleasure to welcome all of you here today for this special event, another chapter of Women in the Critical Eye, this one a conversation with Met curator Kelly Baum and artist Wangechi Mutu, whose sculptures, collectively entitled "The NewOnes Will Free Us," have graced the Met's facade since September and will be there into the fall. This event would not have been possible without the vision, stewardship, and ongoing commitment to the museum by Lulu Wang. And we want to express our thanks to Lulu for all of the good work that she has done, for her enormous contributions, and for helping to create this event and turning it into something so important and meaningful to so many. It is an unusual moment, a challenging moment at the Met for all of us. But if we've learned nothing else, we have learned how important and valuable our community is to sustaining this institution in good times and bad, and for that we're enormously grateful. We're confident we'll get through this moment, the Met will reopen, and we'll continue to serve our public and our constituencies and supporters in all of the ways that we have historically, while also being a stronger institution for what we've learned. So I thank you for all of that. I thank you for your ongoing commitment to the museum, and I'm sure you will enjoy this program a great deal. It is now my pleasure to turn it over to Director Max Holein.
Thanks, Dan, and hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this virtual presentation of Women and the Critical Eye. The world is certainly in a much different place since the last time when we had this event, but I'm delighted that we're able to connect in this very special way today. First, I want to thank our trustee, Lulu Wang. Lulu is an extraordinary friend of this institution, and her tireless leadership has strengthened this initiative, Women and the Critical Eye, in countless ways over the years. She's the ultimate champion for the Met, and we couldn't be more grateful. I'd also like to recognize the dedicated donors who have made the commissioning of Wangechi Mutu's sculptures, the NewOnes, possible. Catherine Stickney and Mark Ronberg, the Ford Foundation, Cynthia, Hazen, Polsky and Leon Polsky, Sylvie Winkler, Jerry Spire and Catherine Farley, and the Directors Fund. I know we are all eager to hear directly from Wangechi Mutu, who will be in conversation with our curator, Kelly Baum, so I'll keep my comments brief. Mainly, I want to thank Wangechi once again for accepting our invitation, for doing the commission, for creating what is really an unbelievable vision and with a sense of creativity, creating these sculptures for the Met. Wangechi has introduced to the Met's facade 4 works of extraordinary presence, poetry, and brilliance. But way beyond that, they also offer, of course, also a critical new perspective to this institution and to all of us who visit it. Taking majestic presence at the entrance to the museum that houses centuries of artworks made primarily by white male artists, the NewOnes Will Free Us present questions of representation. They challenge long-standing hierarchies of race and gender in the art world. Indeed, the 4 seated and in fact also kneeling figures capture also the urgency of this moment and that change has to happen. In addition to the 100,000s of visitors who've experienced these outstanding sculptures while entering and exiting the museum since September, countless others have enjoyed this installation from the front steps, from the sidewalks, from city buses, and of course also from the surrounding buildings, even after the Met closed its doors in March. During this global crisis, Wangechi's sculptures were the artwork that remained on view via Fifth Avenue and truly became important ambassadors for the Met and a beacon for all of New York City. Thanks to all of you as well for joining us, for supporting us, and for really making this museum further evolve in such an important way. The Met wouldn't be the Met without you. And now I would like to turn things over to Lulu.
Thank you, Max. It's such a joy to be here with our first virtual presentation of Women and the Critical Eye. We're not in our usual big auditorium and giant Temple of Gundur, but we are so fortunate to be able to gather here together and celebrate this moment. Before I go any further, I really want to thank Dan and Max for their kind remarks, but also say that those remarks can really be directed at all the women of the Met. at our wonderful members, patrons, volunteers, curators, administrators. We would not be here without your always championing us and cherishing us. And as we work together now to make the Met an even more diverse, welcoming institution, we look to your guidance and support. So, 15 years, we've come a long way. From a few dozen women gathered together over coffee cups to now hundreds of women coming together every year to celebrate women and art. Our founding principle was really just to encourage women to enjoy art, to develop a critical eye, and to perhaps collect art along the way, but mostly as a way to enrich our lives. Together, we've explored everything from photography to American paintings, Latin American art, jewelry, to name a few. And most importantly, along the way, we have learned so much together. I'm really proud to say that we have created a platform that prioritizes and the voices and contributions of women in art. And so to that effect today, we're so pleased that noted artists Wangechi Mutu and Kelly Baum, the Cynthia, Hazen, Polsky, and Leon Polsky, Curator of Contemporary Art, the Met, are joining us in that important and vital tradition of celebrating women in art. To close, I want to thank all of you for believing in our mission and in supporting us. You've brought great fun to us, good friends, mothers and daughters to come with you, and you have all contributed to what we are and what we are to the Met. An invaluable, warm, and generous group of friends, and we are so grateful for this. In fact, because of your remarkable generosity, the Critical Eye community has been able to acquire one of the sculptures from Wangechi's installation. We've acquired seated figure 3 for the Met. I'd also like to acknowledge my fellow trustee, Cynthia Polsky, whose generosity allowed the museum to purchase seated figure number 1. These works together are significant additions to the Met, and we look forward to continuing to direct a portion of your generous gifts towards supporting the Met's acquisition of the important works of art by women artists, which is still a vastly underrepresented portion of art in major museums. And so, if you haven't already done so, we hope you might consider making a gift to support our efforts. We would be thrilled to have your support at any level, and I must say I'm truly grateful to have all of you here today with us, friends from all around the world, even some gentlemen friends. And now I hope you enjoy the conversation between Kelly Baum and Wangechi Mutu, and thank you so much for being here.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Today, I am honored to be speaking with Wangechi Mutu from her studio in Nairobi. We're holding this conversation from across a vast distance. I'm in my home in Ossining, New York. Wangechi, thank you so much for joining us today at this Women in the Critical Eye event.
Thank you, Kelly. It's really good to be able to speak with you and to discuss my work, and it's also really nice to have this opportunity to speak from my studio in Nairobi, where I've been since the COVID restrictions were put in place here in Kenya. So I haven't been to my New York studio, nor have I seen the seated at the Metropolitan Museum, but it's good to be able to share our thoughts and ideas, and also to reflect on this extremely powerful moment.
And the sculptures that you created for the facade of the museum are more relevant, more important than ever before. And in a few minutes, we'll speak about the relationship between the seated and the national crises that we face today. You'll know from the introductions, Wangechi is the first artist to install site-specific works of art on the Met's historic facade. Her project, The NewOnes Will Free Us, is the first in a series of annual commissions launched in September 2019. The NewOnes Will Free Us is the only exhibition that has remained on view, accessible to the public, since the museum closed in March of this year. And I can think of no better forced sculptures to have watched over the museum and to have provided solace to passersby. Wangechi, you received the invitation to create the 4 sculptures in November 2018 at a pivotal moment in your own life. You'd recently become a naturalized citizen. But this event, this invitation, also arrived during a national crisis in the United States. Specifically the demonization and punishment of immigrants, and the erecting of new borders, both legal and physical, to immigration. Asylum seekers were also targeted. And I wonder how the 4 sculptures that you created for the Met responded to these events in your own life and in the country as a whole.
It's such an incredible moment right now, and there's such a great deal of pain and rage and transformation. I think there's also a lot of hope within this fire of change that we're seeing. And I'm continuing to work, and I'm in my studio, and I wanted to have this conversation with you in my studio because I spend a tremendous amount of time here, which is very grounding for me during these times of COVID and political upheaval and change, you know. And what I can say about these 4 sculptures, these figures, these women who are still seated in front of the Metropolitan Museum, is that they were not an idea in my mind to create this completed sculptures. They were drawings, and they were drawings that have basically, there's a continuum of the drawings I do as I produce work, and I've been sketching and making these sort of subconscious drawings that create basically the egg, the beginning of all of my work. When I was asked to submit, there was a lot going on at the time when I got the call, specifically from Sheena. There was a lot of fear in the United States. There was a relief in my life. It was kind of this contrary and a contrasting feeling, because I had just received my citizenship, which had taken a long time for various reasons. But because of the state of politics in the United States, the leadership, the president in particular, it was nerve-wracking for people who had green cards. We don't think that we never thought that those were going to protect us from all manner of changes, especially during this time. So I received my citizenship. I was so happy, so thrilled to be able to move back and forth between my mother home and my adopted home, New York. But also I was put in a state of peace. And I think these works, as they developed, came from a place of confidence, a place of peace, a place of dignity. They were joyous pieces for me. For me, it was creating something that was going to open the doors into a future for myself and for those who hoped to live and to survive and to be a part of the United States, right? And also be a part of the places that they came from, because most immigrants are bringing such a tremendous amount of rich heritage and languages and all the things that make the United States such a powerful place, right? So that's how I came about them. They were in my sketchbook. I worked on them for several weeks and several months, actually, because I had to sort of go from molding them and casting and actually creating them myself with my own hands to working with a foundry. But the backdrop to this time was painful, to say the least. Watching families, not just adults, men and women, but men, women, and children racing, plunging themselves across the border because they knew that the borders were becoming more and more restrictive. The Mexico-United States border in particular and then seeing how they were mistreated, in such an inhumane way, and thrown into these cages was it was heart-wrenching. It was absolutely. It was the kind of thing you don't believe is going to happen in real time in your own lifetime. And the worst part of this is that having been through this entire journey of getting my immigration and all the legal complication of it, I understood so much about how difficult it was going to be for these people to get out of those cages, out of those detention spaces. So I really believe these pieces were, for me, a way to signal hope and strength and the potential for change, and for these laws that basically allow immigrants to come to the United States and to move to different countries all over the world, actually, to become humane laws that protect humans from one side of the border to the next, wherever they plan to be going. So I had those things in mind. I also had a very hectic schedule. So I was given the commission, and it was expected less than a year from that date to be completed. And so it was also a challenge from that perspective. It was, really coming up with the right solutions for something that would sit in front of this incredible building that represents so much to New York City and the United States and the world at large. The Metropolitan Museum is such an important institution. All that pressure went into the cauldron that I used to stir up these artworks.
So the title of each individual work is the seated 1, 2, 3, and 4. But the title of the exhibition, the title you gave the exhibition, is "The New Ones Will Free Us."
Yes.
And both that title and the identity of each of these 4 figures as new ones, as new arrivals to both the country, to the city, to the Met, all of that serves to humanize and validate and dignify and uplift the new ones. And you did so at the exact moment that new ones were being demonized in the country, not by everyone in the country, but by a large segment of the country. And so I see that as a provocation.
Yeah, I mean, it's for me, the New Ones also is not a partisan title. It's not it's a genderless title. It's a title that I wanted to use to indicate that the leadership is in crisis. The leadership of a lot of countries is in crisis, and that's why people are suffering. That's why the earth is suffering. That's why we've lost some of our way in understanding what we're supposed to be doing for one another as a human, as a species. So for me, the new ones are new ideas, are the new voices, are kind of the young people who have a new way of saying things that perhaps we've been saying for a long time but haven't been listening. The new ones are certainly the immigrants. The new ones are all of the people who fought for rights, the trans community, anybody who is entering the conversation and demanding that they be treated fairly and they be seen equal to everyone else. Those are the new ones to me. So the new ones include ourselves if we are ready to take on that courage and harness this power that is being revealed to us on the streets of all over the world. But I also wanted to make sure that these pieces had this feeling of stability and integrity and dignity. I wanted these women not to feel that they don't belong, not to feel that they were not invited, not to feel that they are somehow transitory. So for me, the seated, they're seated in an institution that represents them and is also them. They are the new chapter to I think, every conversation that we need to be having, which I'm thrilled to watch happening. Difficult new chapters for a lot of institutions, of course. But for me, they were completely unfettered and courageous and present.
And they're completely embedded in the facade of the museum. They seem entirely at home there. And I mean, they own the pedestals on which they rest, and the discs, the polished discs, which appear on the front of 3 of the sculptures. They reflect light. They serve as beacons to the public, and on certain days, at certain times of the day, you can see the light reflecting off of those discs from a block or 2 away. And it's as if they're calling to you and addressing you directly, asking something of you, asking you to listen to the new ones. And I think that's such a beautiful and important gesture. What you just said also makes me think about the figures themselves, their visage, which is both human and celestial. They're both like and unlike us. And in an earlier conversation, you spoke about the importance, your desire to strike a balance between the familiar and the unfamiliar, and that played an important role in your thinking. And can you talk about the figure's appearance in relationship to this dialectic of familiar and unfamiliar?
Absolutely. I think because of the way I've been working for the last 2 decades with collage and creating these combination figures that are unhuman and superhuman all at the same time. I think I have this both attraction and a knack for grafting from different histories, particular iconography that, for example, reflects sainthood or deities, or I think one of the things that I always found really peculiar and actually really powerful and problematic was that we call foreigners and immigrants aliens. And so I've done a tremendous amount of research into why do we think of aliens the way we do, both in terms of the actual word, but also visually. What gives us the idea of what we think an alien looks like? And often most aliens have been depicted as looking like the most exotic immigrant at that particular moment. Our imagination actually cannot represent things that are not ourselves. So when we talk about aliens, we're usually talking about something that looks like us but doesn't feel familiar enough that we're comfortable with it, right? So we're a little bit judgmental, a little bit fearful, a little bit distant from it. And I think that idea has also been in my work for a long time, because I understand that feeling of being being inside the institution, but at the same time not necessarily belonging. And I'm saying this as a foreign national at that point, and both undocumented and documented, alien, which is these are all the terms that I use in immigration. But I'm also saying that because I think when I left Kenya as a young girl, I also felt a sense of alienation. It was really more to do with wanting to find myself and wanting to find what it is about my creativity that was churning inside of me, I guess. But the thing with these figures for me is that there is just so many layers. There's all of these references to traditional embellishments and traditional jewelry and traditional objects. There's also, I look at a lot of fashion. I look at a lot of how women in particular use their bodies and what they wear to send messages of their position, their desires, their hopes. I think the first of the drawings that I made was actually the woman with the disc in front of her mouth, which is actually a reference to, the Surma tribes. Even in Mozambique, there's Makonde tribes who have plates in their lips, which have always been used in a way to kind of, especially when they're written about from a foreign perspective, to sort of denigrate the reading of these people. But really, when you look much closer, you realize that these discs, not only are they extremely elaborate and difficult to wear, similar to a corset or something, or heels, expensive Louboutins, right? But that they carry a lot of of historical information about that particular woman, about her family, about her tribe, about her entire life, actually. And as would have it, the larger the disc, the more respected and revered this woman is. And it's not just about that disc, it's about many other, I feel, kind of historical archives and languages that are carried on women's bodies and on people's bodies in various histories. I was really interested in how the body can be a library, can be a vessel that carries information from this time to the next. And I feel like in some ways this is actually what's happened. Not only are they reflective of light, which is traveling from the sun, which is many, many millions of miles away, but the fact that these objects have been able to stand, you know, I kind of wished for it. So I should say that I really wished that they would be there for a year. And unfortunately, the COVID, this awful virus, has made some things possible that that we didn't think were possible. So they've been up for a year. Or at least will be up for a year by the time, you know, I think they're supposed to come down sometime in the fall. And they are, in messages I've received from people, hopeful works. They are works that remind us what is human about us, what is, you know, dignified about being, you know, a conscious Homo sapien, right? And I think that's important. I think art ought to do that. And even in the streets, as they've been empty in the nights and the days of COVID, I think people have walked down Fifth Avenue and seen them and felt a glimmer of hope.
I felt that way when I saw them for the first time since March, when I visited the museum last week. And that's the perfect transition to my next question, because the works have enjoyed a lifespan that was a long lifespan that was somewhat unexpected. We had planned to deinstall them in January 2020, but because they were so successful and so beloved, we extended the exhibition to June, and then the outbreak of the pandemic forced us to extend the project through fall, early to late fall of this year. And their unexpected longevity has meant that those 4 sculptures have not only stood guard over a mostly empty museum, which is such a painful, I think, thing to contemplate, an empty museum. A museum isn't a museum if it doesn't have a public inside of it. But their longevity has also meant that they've stood witness to a pandemic, and also the intensification of an ongoing national crisis around race and racism, and of course the resulting protests, which have called for the complete overhaul of society, of our social institutions, our art institutions, and have also resulted in either the removal of monuments, or the call for the removal of monuments to enslavers, to Confederate soldiers, and also to colonizers across the country. And so the historical moment that we're in now, it's not unrelated to the historical moment in which the sculptures were installed, but something has definitely changed. And throughout it all, the sculptures have remained on the facade of the museum, looking out over Fifth Avenue. And I wonder if this new context, has that changed the sculptures in any way, or changed your thinking about the sculptures? Have the sculptures' identity or significance, have they evolved, or has their message merely been amplified?
I mean, I think the right person to ask would be the people who are witnessing them as they walk by. But I feel there is such an incredible movement towards looking at the objects that represent us, right? And it's not just the institutions and the laws; those are absolutely under scrutiny. But I think people are looking at these images of mostly men, men who were considered heroes in their time and from their region, and and wondering how in heaven's name these people represent them when the amount of violence and cruelty and it clearly indicated racism that they held in their positions is also represented in this image. So I think there's such an incredible time of recognizing that these icons, these gods in the form of bronze, mean something to people, that they hurt people, that they reflect things that they shouldn't, that they have stood silent and complicit to various really hurtful moments in history, and that these things need to change, and that people are completely fearless in removing and decapitating, and it's really I find it such powerful material for my work, because I've spent many years cutting figures up to create new types of images to represent myself and to represent us. I've spent a long time making collages from magazines that represent women, African women in particular, in ways that are denigrating and harmful and completely fictional. So I've used National Geographics, and I've used fashion magazines, I've used hunting magazines and motorbike, all of these magazines where publications where photography is used to represent women in a way that doesn't feel at all accurate to what women are, right? And I think that looking at these objects fall is one of the most moving and cathartic things for me, because I think there's something important in turning over that page in a really distinct and definitive manner, right? Of course, some people have chosen to actually take the statues down and preserve them, but I think even that is important, because making that, preempting that kind of activity is important too. I also think it's important for institutions to be empty right now. I think there's something about this crazy, horrible pandemic that has literally put us on our knees, but right where we're all most human, and said, schools are closed, the museums are closed, you can't go to the mosque, you can't go to church. Who are you, and what do you want this world to be? And I think the trauma is definitely there, the deaths are real, but there's only going to be more if we don't address some of these extremely difficult human rights violations that have been carried over generation after generation, bill after bill, and created the kind of environmental and health crisis that COVID actually is. It's a virus that actually is, it's like a script. It's sort of telling us something that we had no idea how to tell ourselves. We all want to go back to museums. We all, want to be in restaurants together, and some people are, and they're getting infections, of course. But I also think that there's something to be said for how unpredictable this time is. We don't know when we're going to get back our normal, and we don't know if it'll ever happen. And the only way we could probably try to stitch some kind of semblance of normality together is by gathering together and deciding what do we do? Literally the mask wearing for me is one of the most incredible metaphors. It's of course it's about keeping you healthy, but it's also about making sure that other people are okay, because you don't know what you're carrying. And I think that breaking down individuality, breaking down human rights into something. It's not about each and every person, right? It's about a shared contract is so important. And I think that's what I feel optimistic about, but I also feel very charged and inspired. And I don't know if I could say that the work that's happening in the studio is directly related to everything that's happening, but I know that everything that's happening is going to affect how I proceed. And it comes out, and I think that I honestly think there's something quite wonderful about the seated and how they entered just before this moment. That also happened for a reason. I do believe in this kind of these gestures.
I think that your idea of the benefits of a pause, and so in New York, I think the governor's word for this moment is pause, to describe the closing of the economy in order to protect the citizens of the state from COVID. But you can understand the pause in a different way. And so the pause has meant, of course, to protect us. It has produced some unfortunate side effects around the economy, jobs, and education. But if we consider it in a different way, that we have the pause prompted by COVID, has given us the chance to really to reconsider and rethink what it means to be human, what it means to be just, what it means to be equitable. And I think and those questions came to the fore as a result of the protests, which are ongoing.
Yeah.
And so the pause has allowed for a moment of reflection and self-reflection, and it's given people and institutions time to decide how they want to proceed. And because I think most people agree that we cannot go back to the way things were, and not only because it's physically dangerous, but because it's unjust, and we need to completely overhaul.
It's dangerous to the soul. I mean, it's dangerous to many people are dying, and in ways that are absolutely incomprehensible, except that now we have phones and we can film these public murders. And I also think that disease has played such a huge role in these very incredible historical moments where either it's been used to eliminate people and eradicate populations and what they call ethnically cleanse the United States, and for a virus to sort of take back those rights and say, wait a minute, this has gone on for too long. I also think I think that's incredibly powerful, and I think we need to read these things. You know, I think one of the things that one thing that I find important as an artist is that I don't have to be rational. So I can read I can read these things much easier because I'm not necessarily concerned about everything linking up perfectly, but it is I think in everybody's mind that that the protests and COVID have come together. That COVID, especially in places where the Black and brown populations are oppressed or do not have the same rights, is proving to be a disease of racism, right? Because of all the issues that come with a racist society, including health and the way information is distributed, and who gets to get tested, because tests are not free, and they're expensive. Of course, in Kenya, it's a majority Black African population, but that doesn't mean that there hasn't been police brutality. So really what you're looking at is a crisis in power and leadership, and how people use their power in violent ways to intimidate and to pick on the most vulnerable people, because here really what's been happening in Kenya is that the police have attacked poor people for not wearing masks, for being out after curfew time. All of these things, which are really difficult to do when a mask costs the same price as a meal. And at the beginning of the restrictions on because of COVID, it was difficult for people to get masks, and people had to move around to make money and make put food on the table. So it's also, I think it's a mirror, this virus has this incredibly, and I know the mirror is in my mind because of my work, but it really is a mirror on each and every community and each and every nation's capability and interest in addressing the most pressing issues. And
Yes.
and I really think museums also have a big role to play in that. And in a way, I think that pause button is so, that pause, let's stop for a second and rethink this, is much more obvious in institutions, because there's so many people who have been affected by it, the people who work there, but also people who want to get away from their homes or from the street or whatever, cannot go and think and be calm and regard their thoughts in museums. But museums are not ready for people because they too have also absorbed the issues of the society. I mean, museums for me, and I'm saying this knowing that my work is in front of the most incredibly phenomenal encyclopedic museum in the country. Museums represent people, and as much as people have not dealt with their dysfunctions and their racisms and their prejudices and their inequities, museums will reflect it. It may not be the most obvious thing for some, especially those who are benefiting from all of these inequalities, but it is important to understand how synced up museums and institutions are to the populations that they represent or they claim to represent, right? So that stillness, that is so heavy, it's so daunting, I think is also important because it's really like a divine stop for a second and let's figure this out, and those who can write, those who can make art, those who can continue creating, I think have been extremely inspired and busy. I mean, that's another thing that I find really profound is that the poets and the writers and journalists and photographers are working away trying to make sense of this, and in some cases trying to make a lot of nonsense because they're afraid of telling the truth. But the truth is the only it's the only anti-venom to this. This is a really powerful disease, and if it can be talked about as a singular thing, which obviously it's singular but with many different parts, and it's got to be a moment where the regard for what has happened and the respect for the truth of where history really, what really happened in history and how it got us here, it has to be brought to the front. And it's not just brought to the front, it has to be uttered. I think there's something about expression right now and saying things and showing them as opposed to just assuming or keeping them hidden in books. People are screaming, there's Black Lives Matter for a reason. The words have power, but they also insist on the visibility of those violences that have been placed upon huge populations of people. I think Brazil is going through a similar kind of upheaval in a way, probably not as in terms of the protests. There are protests, but in terms of the Black population that is suffering there because of this particular disease. And interesting to see what's happened there with the leadership, because it's a very kind of similar, I think, arrogant leader who refuses to take care of his people. Let's put it frankly. That's what it is.
I love the idea that this is the moment, again, a moment that has been made possible by almost a full stop, in institutional life. This is a moment that's made it possible for us to exercise our demons, or to chart a path forward for doing so, to create a roadmap for real change. Did you consider it a call to action addressed to society at large, but also to the institution? Was it a call for change, a call for reckoning?
Well, Kelly, I mean, it's it's hard to answer that question because I feel like every time I make my work, on the one hand, it's the most serene and wonderful moments of my life, spending hours figuring out how I want this work to live outside of my mind. Yes. Learning how to use materials, especially now that I have my studio in Nairobi, that are extremely familiar to me, that have a particular place in my mind all the way to back to my childhood. Every work I make is a prayer. As much as I get lost in my everyday and in other things that attach themselves to the practice of making art, I have such a deep feeling of gratitude, because what I am doing is what I feel I do best. It's the way I communicate best, through my art. Not through doing interviews, not through doing artist talks, but through my work. It is the language that links to the deepest part of my core, my authentic self. So I don't take it for granted, and so every time I'm trying to figure out what this idea is and how it's going to manifest into the physical and real world in front of other people, I'm thinking about how this idea needs to speak from the very depths of my mind and my consciousness about my humanity, my pain, my love, my experience, and the complexity of my experience as an African woman who's now a dual citizen, who's a mother, who's a wife, who's all of these things that I cherish, but that are worth speaking about, because what I'm uttering and I'm putting out in the world is that I exist, that my people exist, that my grandmother, my mother, my family, the people who suffered to get me thus far exist and existed, that we will continue, that we have resilience, that we have harnessed this power for so many centuries. And I was talking to a friend, Curator, the other day, and one of the things I was saying is that, when you think about African women in particular and how long we have been mothers straight out of the continent. Now I'm in Kenya, so I can say from the crucible of humankind, we have carried generations and generations of humans up until all of the migrations that you see, all of the people who've scattered all over the world and forgotten that they're African in origin and DNA. That power is within our DNA, and it is within our minds and our cells and our capabilities. And to have survived what it took, and I'm not just talking about these intervals in between the last 500 years, 1,000 years, and so forth. I'm talking about the tens of thousands of years that it took for us to get here, which is what I think art is about. All of that information, I feel, is bubbling inside of me when I'm making work, and I really do feel a responsibility to say that we're here to share this planet. We're here to make semblance of why we're here. We're here not to be afraid anymore of things that are inexplicable. We've made art for tens of thousands of years because it was a frightening planet. We didn't know what the weather was, or what the sun was, or which animal would come and get us in the middle of the night. And now we've got so much more control, but also control is actually the wrong thing. We've got such a sense of our place, right? And our place is that we are sharing. We are not above. We're not the smartest. We are not the ruling species. We are completely sharing this space, and every work I make, I try to get more and more articulate and clear about that idea. And just to answer your question in a very, very long way, and in that way, I do feel that I'm channeling this strong protest to say, let's be compassionate, let's be humane, let's learn to understand how to give and take without ruining. Let's be at one with all that we have, which is all that we have, as opposed to over producing or over consuming, or squandering, or being greedy, or adding for whatever reason, because I think economies feed off of wars, economies feed off of strife, economies feed off of destroying the leadership in other economies. So it really is a very important moment, I think, for women leaders. It's a really important moment for artists who can combine the various aspects of politics, poetry, vulnerability, ambivalence, and clarity into one item, into one object, into one poem, and into one song. It's a really important moment for artists to speak up as well, because some of the incredibly powerful language that we're hearing on the streets is ephemeral. It needs to happen, but it is a fire that will burn, and there'll be ashes left over. And what we need after these ashes have cooled down is actual sustainable structures to proceed forward. We need to change laws. We do need to defund institutions that do not stand to protect us. We need to look at teachers and how much they get paid. We need to look at mothers and how much they get paid, in spite of how many kids they're raising. All of these issues, some are more obvious than others, need to be dealt with in a really deliberate and organized fashion. Otherwise, this will be another one of these incredible moments in history where everything erupted, everything went crazy, and nothing got resolved, nothing changed. And we nobody wants that. I mean, I think that's the main thing right now, is as exhilarating as it is and as powerful as it is. I think that the cautionary story is this could just go ahead and enter the books and be an event to speak about.
The flame could be extinguished completely, and nothing changes.
Yeah, we have to be ready to make those changes, and some of them are extremely complicated and painful, and a lot of egos need to be dampened and shut down, and I think women need to enter the conversation, because women leaders always have the capability that I find amazing in everything that women do, which is to look at other people and see the humanity in them, look at the other people and see the pain, not just people who look like them or kids who are theirs, but families and the environment, and sort of that kind of view of longevity. I think women are really genius at looking at the ramifications of an activity that you do today. I mean, you frack and dig for oil today, but what are you going to do about the rivers tomorrow? What are you going to do about the poisoned people down the river? All of those issues and more need to be looked at in such a serious way. And even in Kenya, there's just a need for reckoning. I have been quite impressed, because the leadership here has really taken the disease seriously, and the measures that were put in place in mid-March were really strict, but they have we've reaped the benefits, because the numbers are really low. I think we also need to look at what leadership does, how people are less confused when one person who is elected to say things says them the right way. But I think this goes for museums too. I think museums if there is a clear message, if there is a moral and conscientious leader, people will come and follow, and they will understand what really needs to happen in those institutions. And for the most part, the reasons why institutions haven't gone in the right direction is because the leadership has not prioritized those kinds of moments and rights and inequalities, that are so important.
You remind me of, and this is a slight tangent, but I think one of the things that makes art such an important participant in the dialogue that we're having now around change is its affective power. And so, art has the power to affect us emotionally, psychologically, and that can trigger a change in consciousness or awareness that prepares you for a more profound evolution in society. And I had not thought about your 4 sculptures this way, but I always understood them as 4 individual female figures, even though each is a mirror image, or there are 2 pairs which are mirror images of one another. But now I think of them as sisters, or as a family, as a multi-generational family of female leaders who are beckoning us, who are modeling a future for us around justice and care, which is just such a beautiful idea. So I thought that we might end with one last question. So, as you know, and as many of the people watching this talk know, the museum was able to acquire 2 of the 4 sculptures. And that means that at some point in the future, 2 of those sculptures will be installed inside the building. And I wanted to ask you how you'd like to see them installed in the museum, where in the museum you'd like to see them installed. Do they change by virtue of being displayed in the interior of the Met? I think of that moment when they migrate inside as an evolution, maybe in their identity or meaning, or maybe not. I'm curious what you think.
I think ironically, this is one of the first times I feel like the work being on the outside is more powerful than being on the inside. but I do think for the permanence of exhibiting the work, the 2 works that were acquired by the Met, I think it's going to be great to have them inside. As I said, the Met is a really important museum for me. As a student, I went to the Met so many times, and at that point could pay a quarter to get in, and that suited my budget. And I think what's profound about those times for me is I was much more fresh from having left Nairobi, and I would visit the various departments and places that we were supposed to visit as students, but I'll also go to where the African objects were displayed and exhibited, and I always had the same feeling that I've had with many of these exhibits, which is, can these pieces not be shown with the freedom and the dynamism and the exuberance that they represent? Is there not a way to break this glass away from them and light them differently? And I had all of this sort of conscious and subconscious critique, and so however these works are exhibited, I want them to from the inside and the outside continue to represent light and hope and power and care and that stillness that comes from knowing that you are supposed to be here and you represent something because this place is yours and it's part why it exists is because you are in it. Otherwise, it wouldn't exist. So, so I believe all of these issues related to how different histories are represented, and we know that that has been such a conversation, a contested. It's a really difficult conversation. Not difficult because we don't know what the right thing is, but difficult because the prejudices that happen in society have been carried on into space, into the spaces of the museum, and this needs to end. And especially when it has been so clearly articulated by art historians and curators and students and people whose traditions and heritages are represented in the museums. It's obvious that the museum is in service of these works. The museum is there to take care of these works, not to oversee them or hoard them, but to really present them with the greatest light that they were produced, and to try to make up for whatever is difficult to represent. So if you cannot show a chihuahua on the head of a dancer, then you must explain that this piece is an angel. It sits on this spirit human who dances for his people. So I just hope I have a good time looking at the works, and I hope that my kids enjoy it. I mean, that's what I hope. I go in there and I feel proud, and that's going to happen hopefully because we have a conversation about it, and it's something I'm looking forward to. But I'm also looking forward to the departments and the areas where I love visiting, feeling like they are filled with imagination and depth in terms of how they exhibit, they talk about, they describe the works, and that there's a real attempt to not a real attempt. In fact, there's an absolute attempt to be honest about issues relating to provenance, the history of works, the true original owners of the works, the makers of the works. I think everyone right now is calling for truth. And it's going to take us so far to admit that things haven't been right, and that they won't be immediately turned around, but we can at least say, yes, we haven't done this right. We've taken advantage of people, of places, of cultures, of circumstances, and that needs to end. I look forward to seeing them.
It's definitely a moment for honesty and unearthing and transparency. And so I also look forward to that moment. I personally am so excited that your sculptures now are entering the collection, or have entered the collection, and not just because I worked with you on this project and saw it birthed from sketchbook to bronze, but because there's so much of the sculpture's DNA resides in the Met's collection, and I think your sculptures speak to and reflect on objects from many different departments, and so I can see them floating or migrating from place to place inside the Met. And I just want to thank you for joining me for this conversation. I wish we could do it every week. I learned so much from you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I'm glad we got to do this. It's great to have this lecture specifically for women thinkers, and it's I'm glad that it was we kept it on the calendar. And it's kind of an interesting way to do it. I think it's rare that you do these sort of kind of public lectures in intimate spaces, you in your home, me in my studio, but it's good, and I'm glad we've been able to talk. And I think conversation is also another one of these incredible freedom pillars. I think we need to keep discussing and talking and admitting and forgiving and working make a future that's actually worth living in for ourselves and for anybody who comes after us, including our kids. So thank you so much. Thank you.